Act, but that is not correct because once a body of three is appointed, they become a subcommittee, which is mentioned in the act. And that means a quorum of two requires that the meeting be posted and publicly available. So the Open Meetings Act is very simple, and it's just easiest just to do what it says. The Freedom of Information Act, of course, frequently gets more changes than the Open Meetings Act, and the clerk of the community is usually the person who oversees the Freedom of Information Act. Is that true in Birmingham?
Yes.
Yes, that's what I would expect. So those are two of the things we have to pay attention to. What's next? Well, the city or village charter. And that is very important. I hope you have all read the Birmingham City Charter. That is very important. Sometimes I warn communities in advance that I'm going to give them a quiz on their charter, but I didn't warn you in advance, so I won't do that. But I just challenge you to know what it says. And why is that important? Because when I get a call, usually on Tuesday morning, that begins with, "Oh, Coco, you won't believe what we did last night." They'll tell me what kind of municipalities they are. If they're a township of either kind of township or either kind of village, I'll say, go ahead, because those are pretty standard charters for both townships and villages. But if they're a city, I will have to say, do you have your charter at hand? Do you have your rules and procedures at hand? Because those are very important, and you would be surprised at how much they vary. And I will send you only to Oakland County. Just look around Oakland County and pick out some other cities and read their charters, particularly the section that relates to your role, the council role. And you'll see many, many different things. And then, of course, there's a General Law Village Act of 1865. Next, please. Then we have ordinances and laws passed by municipal government, and then the council rules of order. I want you to notice we didn't get to Robert's rules yet, did we? These are all documents that take precedence over Roberts. Now, your commission rules are very clear. It says, commission meetings shall be governed by the rules contained in the most recent edition of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, in all instances in which they are applicable and not inconsistent with the statutes of the United States or of Michigan or with the adopted charter of City of Birmingham or these rules of procedure. That is important to understand because you can have rules in your rules of procedure that are in conflict with Roberts, and they're fine, and then you just use Roberts for the other things. So don't ever let anybody shake Roberts at you and say, oh, you're not doing something you should. The chances are you may have adopted your own rules of order. Now, a recent comment at the commission was, somebody said, our rules of order, our rules of procedure are suggestions, not mandates. Well, it depends on how the rule is stated. Sometimes they are goals, sometimes they're adopted procedures, and sometimes they're charter requirements. Remember, I'm specifically talking about the Birmingham rules of procedure. For example, here's one that's a goal. It is the desire of the City Commission to conclude all business not later than 11 p.m. The commission will consider this goal during their deliberations. That's a goal. Do many communities have rules that are stronger than that? Yes, it's not uncommon to see a rule that says the city council will adjourn at 10 o'clock unless a motion is made to extend time. And a motion to extend time, by the way, requires a 2/3 vote. So that is often an issue, but that is very common to see in rules. Here's one that is an adopted procedure. The City Commission may take action on any motion, either by voice or roll call vote, A roll call vote shall be taken if requested by any commissioner, the city clerk, or any member of the public in attendance. So if any of those three groups, a city commissioner, the city clerk, or a member of the public says, I call for a roll call vote, doesn't take a second, doesn't take a vote, because your rules say shall. You have to do that. So you do have some things in your rules that are definitely not suggestions. They are mandates. And finally, the third kind of thing that is in your rules is charter requirements. Here's one. The Birmingham's city charter states that 4 members of the city commission shall constitute a quorum, that the commission shall only act by ordinance or resolution, that is an official action in the form of a motion, and that a minimum of 4 votes shall be required to adopt any such motion. That doesn't mean you can say, well, we have a full commission tonight, but I think we should just let this go by 3 votes. You can't do that. That's in your charter. You are committed to 4 votes. By the way, that is not unusual. Although it's not a state law in Michigan, it's very common for city councils to have the rule that the minimum number for the quorum is also the minimum number for the vote to pass. And I can remember meetings of the planning board where the chair will have said, actually it's happened at the city commission too. We only have 4 members in attendance. You have to have a vote of every member who's here. Do you wish to put your item on a different agenda? So those are important things to remember. So what do you want in your rules? You seem to have I assume the speaker who spoke under public comment is obviously a regular watcher because he's asking a question that you have asked. How do we get something on the agenda? How is that done? So we're going to discuss that in a few moments, but I wanted you to have the understanding that before we even get to Roberts, you can establish any rules that you want. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, actually, as the manager knows, my favorite organization to be the parliamentarian for is the Wayne State Student Senate. And every year we go on an advance. And I mentioned that to you because about 6 years ago now, I think it was the incoming president said, do we have to have a retreat? And I said, well, it's a good thing in the summer to get together and set your goals for the year. He said, oh no, I want to have the meeting. I just want to call in advance because we're moving forward, not back. So it's a recognized form, even though we don't indeed very much use so much of Roberts, and the yellow page today illustrates about how much of it we actually use. It is a recognizable format for a meeting. People who come to the meeting recognize that that's how things happen. It introduces motions that lead to decision-making, and it prescribes minutes that record action. So that's what parliamentary procedure really is, and that's its intent. And when people say, well, we don't use parliamentary procedure, I will say, well, what do you do? They say, well, we make motions and vote. Well, indeed, that is about all it is. I mean, I have a very thick book, which you've all probably seen a copy of Roberts, that has a lot of other information in it. And by the way, the new edition, the 12th edition, comes out later this month. So if you suddenly get excited about parliamentary procedure, don't spend your money till September on a new book. Next, please. Basic objectives of parliamentary law. Accomplish the objectives for which the group is organized. And in your case, that is the business of the city of Birmingham. Expedite business. That does not mean speed it up. That means handle it correctly. Handle it so that it's clear what it is that you want to do. Ensure justice and equality to all, and of course, maintain order. And the final one, as the mayor said, I have been the parliamentarian for the Michigan Municipal League for a very long time and traveled the state. And one of the things that really marks the quality of the Birmingham City Commission is that you do wait for the mayor to call on you to speak. That's a gift that you should enjoy. That's not entirely common across the state. Next. Okay, let's talk about some verbiage first, some vocabulary that I noticed that you've been challenged by. The first is direction. What does direction mean? Direction is unanimous consent. No objection. When someone suggests unanimous consent, the chair should ask, is there any objection to making the decision to study the kinds of trees we have? Then pause. Seeing no objection, the direction is to study the kinds of trees we have. If there is an objection, a vote is taken. And I think when you've used unanimous consent, you haven't had the ability to take the pause and say, is there any objection? Perfectly all right to object. I mean, it happens quite often. One of the few meetings that I had in public in the last 3 months, at each one, somebody objected to something that was presented, and that let the maker, the person who objected, have the opportunity to have the matter actually voted on. The person in each case actually voted no. In each case, the motion passed, but nonetheless, the member had the opportunity to express themselves. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with making an objection. The next word that you use after direction is consensus. And I kind of wish you would throw that word away, because consensus merely means the dictionary definition, the Robert's Rules definition, is decision of the majority. But I think that the way you've been handling it, you haven't really made it clear what the decision of the majority is. And so I think that you should use motions. Motions clarify the exact request. And I think that the confusion sometimes on what it is you've agreed to has to do with the fact that it was not in a motion. A motion is a formal proposal by a member in a meeting that the assembly take certain action. In a few minutes, we're going to go on and talk a little bit more about how to make that motion. And I'm going to show you on the gold sheet where it describes unanimous consent. And hopefully that's going to help smooth that area out. During debate, the maker of the motion is entitled to speak first. General Henry M. Robert was an engineer and an Army general. He was very, very specific. When people start to study parliamentary procedure in the beginning, they say, oh, this is so difficult. This is so complicated. But once you get started in it, it actually works out quite well. He's a very methodical man, and he intended that we would never speak about an issue without putting the motion on the floor first. That is not really reasonable in local government, because if we walked in and just made the motion first, the public would think we were all at the dewdrop in before the meeting and agreed on what we were going to do. And that's not good planning. So we have some speaking on it, but remember, the chair is always entitled to say, do I hear a motion? 2. So the conversation doesn't have to go on continually, but the intent is that then the maker of the motion makes the motion. There is a second. That tells the body that 2 people want to talk about it, which helps you so you don't have something that only one person is interested in. And then, important, the chair states the motion and says it is moved and seconded that we study kinds of trees, and turns to the maker of the motion and say, you may speak to your motion first if you wish. Now, a member may not speak against his own motion, but he may vote against it. It could be that you made the motion and now you're hearing all the reasons people don't care for it, or you realize that actually it wasn't specifically the motion you wanted. You may vote against it. Of course, people will say, well, couldn't you withdraw it? Well, yes, but after the motion has been made, seconded, and stated by the chair, the body has to allow the person to withdraw it. And I recall a very large convention, a national convention, where I was acting as the parliamentarian. Somebody made a motion, realized it wasn't, when she listened to the debate, that it wasn't what she meant, and came back and asked permission to withdraw her motion. Well, she may not have meant that, but everybody else liked it, and they did not permit her to withdraw her motion. So, but she did say later to me, she did vote against it. Of course, it did, by the way, it passed. But the fact is, that's important. The next one is a key. All remarks must be limited to the merits of the subject immediately under discussion. So we try not to discuss other tangent items. And by the way, in all my years, of course, attending so many city council, village council meetings of all different kinds, this is something that we don't do well. City councils can get off the topic and up the tree about something else quicker than any other organizations that I have ever worked with. Next, please. All remarks must be addressed to or through the chair. And again, I compliment you on doing that. Personal comments about other individuals should be avoided. Members are seldom referred to by name, rather by title. An interesting observation I have about the Birmingham City Commission, and I'm not sure when this transition occurred, but you refer to the commissioners as commissioner and their name. The staff refers to you that way, and yet you refer to the staff by first names. I think that is very odd, and I'm not sure that that's appropriate. That's just a comment from what we in parliamentary procedure call meeting dynamics. But I just think that you might notice that when you're having the meetings, that if you are referred to by a title of respect, Mayor Pro Tem, Council Commissioner, you should probably respond by giving that same title and respect to the person you're addressing. And no member may comment adversely on any prior act of the body. And if there's any member who hasn't been around a long time and would like to send me an email, I will tell you the commissioner to whom this is directed. And they're not serving now and haven't in the last decade. Next, please. Excuse me. Robert? The phone? Thank you. No person should speak a second time on a motion as long as another is requesting recognition to speak for a first time on the issue of motion, and you do have that in your rules. Remarks should be limited to 2 minutes. That's very interesting. You currently do not have a time limit in the Birmingham rules. You are surrounded, I think on every side, by cities and townships that do have time limit rules. So, and which doesn't mean that you should. It just means that it's more common to have them than not. We have definitely had in Birmingham remarks limited to 2 minutes and timed in times when we have had controversial issues on the table. And that was really as much for the public. I recall one very hotly contested issue was when music, Christmas music with words, was played on the loudspeakers downtown. And that brought in an enormous amount of people. It's not fair to the public not to have everybody have the same fair amount of time. You don't want to give somebody 5 or 6 minutes and then the next person gets, only 1 or 2. So we did have a very strict 2-minute time limit. The commission room was positively packed, overflowing, people in the hallway waiting to speak. And curiously enough, the first speaker got up, said his name and a city where he was from, which happens to be on the west side of the state. And one by one, the other people got up to speak, and following his practice, we do not ask for where you live. Following his practice, they all said where they lived. And just about 2 hours later, it was the last speaker, came to the microphone and said his name and said, actually, I'm from Birmingham. And he was the first person who spoke who was from Birmingham. And he said, actually, this has been very interesting, but I'm here for the next item on the agenda. So at the times when we have limited it 2 minutes, it's always been a big thing. And you 2 hours. So if you were one of the last speakers to get to the microphone, for us to have let anybody speak longer than 2 minutes was a travesty. And of course, it also would have made us stay very late. The next one is interesting. Whoops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean the next slide. I meant the next bullet point. The speaker may be asked but not required to state name and any other requested identifying information. I always like to point out to the members of the Michigan Association of Municipal Attorneys, of which our esteemed attorney is one of their honored attorneys, that this is a conversation where I can introduce the subject and then just back away, because everyone has a different opinion on this. The person may be asked their name and other identifying information, but we stopped that when some people who were at the meeting had their houses robbed. And that was not uncommon for a period of time, that people would watch to see where people were from and then take negative action on them. And of course, you don't have to be from Birmingham. You can be from anywhere. It's public comment, not citizen comment or resident comment, but public comment. So, however, the clerks often would like to know who spoke, and so it's appropriate to ask, may we please have your name? I will say we've had a change over the couple of decades that I've been doing this in terms of what's in the minutes about public comment. Many clerks are now just saying 8 people spoke, or are saying just the name of the categories under which people spoke and listing them that way. We long ago gave away saying, many communities gave up saying whether a person was speaking pro or con, because sometimes we actually can't tell. And indeed, remember, we must be gracious because the public cannot correct the minutes. So if we misquote someone, there's really nothing that they can do about it. Next, please. Remarks must be confined to the pending question, of course. Speakers should address the chair and not enter into debate with other members of the audience. It's been a while since we've had that happen. During debate, the chair shall make an effort to alternate between supporting and opposing arguments. And that's when the mayor can say, well, 4 people have spoken in favor of this. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against? But it's not required. Next. Okay. Why don't can we slip forward person who's doing this to the gold sheet? Thank you.
The gold sheet's in the agenda packet, but
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So
thank
you
you
might
very
have to go download that real quick, Jamil.
Okay.
You would show it on screen.
Thank you, clerk.
Mhm.
So on the front, we have, actually, I think first I'm going to go inside to page 3. Page 3 is identified by the fact that it has in very large print at the top non-ranking motions. And then I want you to go to the side column, the second part, forms of voting. This is referencing what I mentioned before. A voice vote is the most commonly used form of voting, ayes and noes. A rising vote, which is the most common method of voting on a 2/3 vote, but since we don't typically rise in city council meetings, it is just taken by show of hands or voice. Show of hands is an alternate for a voice, sometimes used in small boards or committees or very small assemblies. Some conventions use voting cards, and here, a count can be ordered by the chair or by a majority vote of the assembly, but you have already acknowledged that in your rules, you have not gone along with Roberts. You've said any member of the commission, the clerk or the city or the public can order a count. And that's good. I'm not suggesting it's not good, but I just wanted to point out to you that you already have in your rules something that is not in concert with Roberts, and that's perfectly all right. There you go. Unanimous consent is a vote of silent agreement without any objection. And finally, a ballot or roll call vote can be ordered by a majority of the assembly. And again, your rule leaves more opportunities than that. So I wanted you to have that in writing. So when when the chair says, is there any objection? If you object, say so, and the vote will be taken by the usual method. Now, making that main motion, let's go back to the front page.
Coco,
Yes.
if you don't mind, I see a raised hand. Are you ready
Oh,
for a
good.
question, Commissioner?
Yes, very quick question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this has come up a couple times now, a unanimous consent and objecting. But in the absence of a motion, could you explain how and who expresses the item that we are consenting to?
Yes, exactly, which is why you don't use it correctly. Because it's when there is something on, someone makes a suggestion, not a motion, a suggestion. I suggest that we repaint all the benches in the park in the city's burgundy color. Everybody looks around. Is there any objection? Well, seeing none, then direction is sufficient. So it's when there's a suggestion made. When we get to a motion, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute, we can't use unanimous consent anymore. Once there's a motion on the floor, we must follow the rules for a motion. And we're going to talk about how to get that motion on the floor, Commissioner. Okay, does that answer it for now?
Kind of. So if we were to use unanimous consent, a necessary element of that would be that explicit suggestion and timeliness related to the juxtaposition of the suggestion and then the unanimous consent. If
Correct.
somebody suggests something and then we keep talking and somebody suggests something else and then
which your commission does, does every commission regularly, which is why the motion is a more effective tool. Because after everybody's made all the suggestions, someone can make a motion, perhaps combining the suggestions, and now you actually have something stated. Because both direction by unanimous consent and consensus, when they're not made in a motion, everyone is not clear on what the request is. So let's go back to the front page. And Mayor, thank you for seeing that. I can't see all the people, so I appreciate it if you call my attention to anyone who raises their hand. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I will do my best.
And as I commented, you do a very good job on indicating when you wish to speak and waiting until the mayor calls on you. And then we second the motion. I know it's popular for people to also say support. The reason I don't encourage that is because you don't have to be for the motion. In fact, you could be opposed to the motion, but you want it out there, you want it voted on. So get in the habit of saying second. Second simply means somebody else is willing to spend the time talking about it. If nobody's interested in talking about it, then you should just all be very quiet. And the mayor will say, since there is no second, there is no motion, the next item on the agenda is. That's the right way to deal with that. But so as I say, person, when they say support, it's not that it's wrong, it's that it's giving the incorrect idea. And then, very important, motion is made, seconded, and the chair must state it. Why is that important? From a procedural standpoint, it's important because up until the time the motion is stated, if I made it, I can change what I said. If I second it, I can withdraw my second. In other words, things can happen within the group, but as soon as the chair states it, and that is supposed to happen right away, that is the motion. And if you are the maker, and that's not a correct statement of what you said, this is your opportunity to say, point of order. That was not my motion. My motion was to. Or if it's a complicated motion, it's an opportunity for the clerk to address the mayor and say, could that motion please be repeated? And by the way, that's a good thing to do if you're not entirely sure. But you want to get, this is the moment at which we want to make sure what the motion is. Now, some of the suggestions that I have heard have been rather long and complicated, leading other people to say, I'm not sure what you mean. Well, if you know you're going to make a motion when you're at home, write it down. Prepare what your motion is going to be. That way, everyone is clear on what you're going to say. It just makes it easier for everyone if there's a clear understanding of what the motion is. Then again, as I said, the mayor would turn to the person who made the motion and say, would you like to speak to your motion? And then everyone else gets a chance to speak to it. I don't recall in your rules that there was any requirement that every commissioner get to speak to something before anybody speaks again, but I noticed that as a matter of habit, you tend to do that. Let everybody have a chance until you're ready to vote. Not everybody has to speak, but everybody has a chance. And then the question is asked. Are you ready for the question? Which means now we're going to take the vote. And you should be down towards the bottom of your sheet. The chair puts the question. The question is on the adoption of the motion that. And you say the motion again. If you're ever in a meeting, and I know you have been, where somebody says, what are we voting on anyway? Chances are the chair did not state the motion before when it was time to take the vote. So is this a lot of times the motion gets said by the maker, gets said by the chair when they're going to repeat it, and now it's going to get said again when you vote on it. Makes perfect sense. Any questions about this part?
Yes, Ms. Stewart, Mayor Boutros. The motion, if it's already a resolution written on our agenda, there is no need to repeat that motion by even the maker or the mayor or the clerk. We can just, as we normally used to do, normal business, I move the suggested resolution. So
yes, it has to do with the fact that you have gone to putting the motions on the screen.
okay.
Because we've been on Monday Night Live forever. I mean, we were live in the 80s, but it was not until more recently that we had the technology to actually put the agenda on the screen. So we're in the habit of saying the motion always because the people at home didn't know what it was.
Makes sense. Thank you, Commissioner.
So as long as everyone can see the motion when it's made, and I mean everyone in the room either has a laptop or a copy of the printed agenda, and everyone at home can see the screen. So then it's all right to move the,
Mayor?
unless, of course, I see you, Commissioner, unless, of course, it is a motion that someone is making at the meeting and hasn't been printed, then it would be necessary to do the 3 times.
Yeah, we normally intend, Ms. Seward, that if a commissioner made a motion that is not on the agenda and it's not clear, we, the body of the commission, ask the clerk to read it again before we vote it, and for the clarity of it to be reported, what the motion is exactly intended to do.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think as you get in the habit of making more motions, that will become more fluid to you. And you can once you're not using the word consensus, but actually the motion is before you, I think that'll become easier.
Thank you.
Yes, I think that.
I'll give the floor to Commissioner Baller. Do you have a question?
Yeah, or a statement. Now that we're in this world of streaming, broadcasting, live sometimes, and Zoom, it is, I think it's safe to say that it is always the case that someone somewhere is not going to have the printed agenda in front of them. And therefore, it may make sense whether they're watching on Comcast or streaming it on Vimeo or looking in on Zoom, they may not have that in front of them. So I'm going to suggest or offer, if you think it's a good idea, that we read those prepared motions.
Well, we in meetings that I'm doing that are on Zoom where people have the option of calling in, we are reading the motions, because if you call in, you don't have a screen to look at.
Right.
But I don't know. I haven't been paying attention. Do you have a lot of people calling in or doing it on instruments where they don't have the screen?
We have a majority on when they speak, we can see them, but we have several people that, yes, they tune in via phone, but very minimum, as far as I know myself.
Yeah. Well, it might be
We don't always
wise to
display the agenda. We don't always have the agenda displayed, even if you are looking at the screen. You're most likely looking at the speakers.
You're probably right.
Right. You might
Yes.
want to give that some thought, because this doesn't seem like it's going to end soon.
Yes, Commissioner Baller is correct on the, regardless, Ms. Seward, right now, as we're looking right now, this is an example. Had we not asked for a screen to be shared, there's nothing to be shared. So you're only looking at me when I speak or other commissioners. So there's no agenda posted on the screen, and he's correct on that. So I appreciate your suggestion, Commissioner Baller, and I believe we will, not that we're making any decisions tonight, but I believe reading a resolution or reading a motion would not hurt for the sake of more information better than less. But we will give the floor to Ms. Seward again, and unless there's any other questions.
I think I see a hand.
Let me see. Yes, Commissioner Hoff, you need to unmute yourself. Here we go. Commissioner Hoff.
Yes, I think it's very important to restate the motion, because we have so much discussion on our motions that people who may not be following every word. And I think it's a very good idea to always restate the motion. Even for my own sake, many times I say, I hear what we're voting on, so that we're all on the same page. So I'm in full agreement with that.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Hoff. Any other comments or questions on that subject? I see Mayor Pro Tem raising her hand, or no? Okay. Nobody. All right. Ms. Stewart, you may continue with the presentation.
Okay, back to the slides.
All right.
So we have the main motion on the floor. I noticed that the motion that you seem to use more than others is amending. When you amend, sometimes everyone agrees on the amendment. And is there any objection to this amendment? Somebody says, well, can it be a friendly amendment? Well, it's only friendly if everybody likes it. And I won't be disappointed at all if you tell me that you are in organizations where when a motion is made, seconded, and then somebody amends it, they ask the maker and the seconder, is that okay with you? That's a very common practice, but that's not right. Because that would say, let's say it's a commission meeting and there are 7 of you present. One makes the motion, one seconds it, and then you're going on to discuss it. And somebody says, well, I make a friendly amendment. And the chair asks the maker and the seconder, is that okay with you? You have just let 2 people decide what that amendment should be. A friendly amendment is when it's friendly to everybody. Friendly amendment is actually a unanimous consent way of amending a motion. So the chair should always say, it's been moved and seconded to amend, to make a friendly amendment. Is there anyone who objects to this friendly amendment? Asking everybody. And if anybody does, then guess what? You vote on whether or not to use that amendment. And amendments are made, and you can see this on your gold sheet. If you look at the bottom left corner of page 2, types of amendments, and there they are. Amend by inserting, amend by striking, amend by inciting, striking and inserting. Okay. Back to the slides. Thank you. Amendments are made one at a time and pertain to the motion. Require a second, debatable and amendable, and needs a majority vote. There are ways to make amendments to the amendments, but I don't really recommend that. If you want to do that, let's go in person when virtual is gone, and we'll walk through it. The group that does it absolutely wonderfully is my Wayne State Student Senate, when they move to order a pizza and then just go wild on the toppings and where to get it from. But generally speaking, we don't do that. Next slide. There we go. Friendly amendments may be used as long as every member of the body is in agreement with the amendment being proposed. Once a motion is stated by the chair, it belongs to all members, not just the maker and the seconder. Next, please. Now, if this is when you want to postpone something to a definite time, frequently people think they should lay things on the table, but lay on the table is intended to put something off for a very short period of time. And if you don't take it off the agenda by the next regular meeting, it goes away. So it has the nickname, the killing motion, because people would lay things on the table and then everybody would pretend to forget about it and it would be gone. Actually, now that we have very competent clerks and secretaries, they always put it on the next agenda. So that old-fashioned killing the motion isn't really true anymore. But the point is, this is how to delay something from one time to another. And the other thing about it that makes it very attractive is it is debatable and amendable. So as you're discussing whether or not to postpone this, you can say, why? I'd like to postpone this because we need somebody from the forestry to come in and describe different kinds of trees to us. By the way, the reason I mentioned about the trees is there was a time when that was a very, very hot, fill the commission room discussion in Birmingham as to whether or not we should plant all the same kinds of trees on a street or mix them. So just as a fun thing to remember. So that's postponed to a definite time. Next. Well, here's your friend reconsider. You've asked a lot about bringing things back. For the person who's running the slides, don't go back to the gold sheet right now, but I just want to tell the people who have one that this is on page 3 at the bottom. Motions that bring a question again before the assembly. Reconsider is the only American-made motion. And I don't hesitate to say, I don't think any parliamentarian would disagree with me. It's the most complicated. But we are now looking at it in its most simple form. According to Roberts, it's to bring the motion made in the same meeting back for another vote. In the same meeting, and it must be that you voted on the prevailing side. But if you look at your own rules of procedure, they say can move to reconsider at the same meeting or the next meeting unless something has been done. So that gives you some latitude. Again, there's another place where you deviate from Roberts. It's more typically used to reconsider something in the very same meeting. Okay? Requires a second, it's debatable and requires a majority vote. Well, what if you don't get it reconsidered in the same meeting or the next meeting? Next slide, please. Then we go to rescind. Now, this really has to have happened, be done if nothing has happened. You cannot rescind an action that you've done. As I say on the slide, cannot be used when something has been done that is impossible to undo. Requires a second, is debatable and amendable. A 2/3 vote is required when notice is not given, majority vote with notice. And speaking of notice, it's important when you read the Open Meetings Act, you may be surprised to discover that it is not required that you post your agenda. You must post your meeting, but you are not required to post your agenda. So it is perfectly all right to bring up an issue that has not been on the agenda, but very, very often you cannot take action on it simply because it requires notice to the public or requires notice to other commissioners, requires notice to the staff, but it's not impossible to bring something up. I just mentioned this because I just had a call at the end of last week from a councilman who was concerned that they had a closed meeting in the midst of their regular meeting and the closed meeting was not on the agenda. It doesn't have to be. It's entirely possible that the council would be in the midst of having a conversation about something and suddenly say, whoa, we're getting off into the weeds here. We need to be in closed session, of course, for one of the reasons allowed in the Open Meetings Act, and just simply then go into a closed meeting. And that's when he went on to say, well, he based that on the fact that you can't discuss anything that's not on the agenda. And I asked him if his city had a charter amendment, a charter point to that, and he said no. I asked him if they had a rule to that, and he said no. But it's been our tradition. Well, then that's fine. And then that tradition ought to be made into a council rule and put in there, because what was tradition that I would relate to you on how things were conducted and what was tradition in the next 10 years or this 10 years are all different. So just to note that. So that's rescind, and that can be done at any time that the action has not been done. And that literally can be a year or more. Next, please. Okay. Tips for better meetings. Well, you do start the meeting on time. That's very good. Clear rules of procedure that are designed to encourage audience participation. I think that you might look a little bit at that when you're looking at rewriting the rules. Direct all comments and questions through the chair. You get a gold star on that one. And encourage the addition of last-minute items not already on the agenda, but as I have explained, it's perfectly all right to do so. let's go on to the gold sheet again. And I really want to bring up the issue of when do you want to have the time when someone can make a motion for an item not on the agenda? I'm specifically noting that in many of your meetings, there seems to be interest in discussing something that has not been on the agenda. And people are surprised at something being brought up, which they have had no ability to think about in advance. We know that one of the things that makes all council members across the state nuts are what I call seat sheets. When you walk in and there's some new issue that's put before you that you haven't had a chance to think about, do research on, and suddenly somebody wants you to decide. That is understandably very irritating and provoking. However, there is a tool that I have seen used in a lot of city councils that gets around that, and that is under new business, a person, a council member, makes a request to place an item on an upcoming agenda. That lets the other council members, the staff, and the public know that this item is going to be discussed in the future. And because it requires a majority vote to adopt it, it also enables the ability to discuss, is this a priority? Are we taking staff resources, that's time and money, et cetera, to put something on the agenda that actually is not meant to be here right now, or is a much future thing, or something that we want to discuss? So it allows that conversation to happen while not delving into the issue itself, but simply as to whether or not it should be placed on an upcoming agenda. I think that that fits well under new business. You have the new business on the agenda. It is an agenda item. At the end of the items that are already listed, the chair could ask, are there any other items of new business? And then it would be the opportunity for somebody to say, I move to put the issue of what kinds of trees we should have on the next agenda for discussion. That now you haven't spent any money, you haven't used up any staff time, but you have put the council members, the staff, and the public on notice that this is going to be a discussion item. As I say, I find more bodies are using it. I think it's become even more common in the past 5 months because people aren't getting together to discuss things. So they come up with ideas and they don't want to surprise everybody. And it gives everybody the chance to decide it. I'd like to see, I know you had said, Mayor, that no decisions were going to be made tonight, but I would be interested in the council's response, the commission's response to that as a possibility.
Sure.
Let's show everybody.
Elaborate more, Ms. Sword. Thank you for giving us this wonderful presentation. But also, I want to make sure, as we stated earlier, Ms. Sword, this is not an action agenda.
I already said that, but I'm still interested to see.
Yes.
And I also want to have other questions.
Sure. Very happy to open it into a dialogue. Since this is a non-controversial item, I love to hear from other commissioner absolutely on what we have discussed tonight and questions to be asked for Ms. Sword.
Right. And
go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. And I do want to point out, you do not have a rule that you can't take action in workshops. So if you want to have a procedure that you don't take action in workshops, you probably should put that in your rules. Many communities do take action in study sessions, and their rules permit it.
Good to know. Thank you, Ms. Stewart. I'll start with Commissioner Sherman.
So, Coco, first of all, thank you very much for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. Informative as always. As to formal action, it's right on the agenda sheet that no formal action will be taken. So we've actually, that is, whether it's adopted or not, that's been the procedure for workshops. So as to putting an item, allowing commissioners to add items as part of new business, I think that's actually where it belongs, as opposed to someone walking in with a whole prepared report and then saying, we need this now, without the other commissioners having any idea what we're talking about. And I think that would be a good way around that. Especially, I think it would eliminate that. I think we need to talk about this and then getting feedback from other commissioners rather than, some other background that may or may not be relevant to that question. So I would have no issue with that.
Well, I think it has the advantage of having the person who's going to present it actually prepare a motion. And I think that the confusion about a unanimous consent or direction has been that nobody is entirely sure, because there hasn't been the words put there that said, this is what we're talking about. So I think that motions are very successful.
And also, just if I may continue, one of the problems with a Zoom meeting is we're not all sitting in the same room. We can't really see each other. You can't interpret body language or anything else. You can't figure out where things are going. So there's that lack of interaction, which makes figuring out issues much more difficult.
Great. Absolutely.
Comments, questions from Commissioner Hoff? Go ahead, please.
Well, I also agree that that would be a good place under new business and would help everyone to focus in and have a little time to think about it, to hear what the proposal is. So on that, I want to agree that that's a good place. But I have a couple of other questions or comments on the presentation, and I will make them when we're ready.
You go ahead, Commissioner Hoff. The floor is yours.
Okay, first of all, on the gold sheet, there is an item on the back of it that refers to reading and approval of the minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes? And if none, the minutes are approved as written. We don't do that. We have a motion to approve the minutes. And I'd like to ask Ms. Seward how that's to be handled. Is a motion required, or can we say the secretary will make the corrections, and if there are no further corrections, the minutes are approved as corrected?
Thank you very much for referring to the back sheet, Commissioner. Example of a typical meeting, and it's really more of an example of a typical nonprofit meeting, a typical 501c3, the PTA, your religious institution, etc. Lions, AAUW, League of Women Voters, that kind of thing. In a publicly elected body, we have different rules, and two of them are illustrated by differences on this back sheet. You have identified one. Yes, we do always have a motion on the minutes. It's a motion to appropriately to adopt the minutes, which requires a second and an opportunity for people to make corrections to the minutes if they wish. The second place is the very bottom, and that is the adjournment. It is, in many nonprofits, it's common for the chair to say, is there any further business? Pause. Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. We have a challenge in elected government, in the Open Meetings Act and the issue of notice. We have to really make sure by a vote that everyone is ready to adjourn the meeting, because once we adjourn, we're finished. We can't suddenly run to the parking lot and say to everybody, oh, we forgot to vote on something, come on back. That's just not doable. So those are two items. And since you've asked about minutes, I might just say, I was speaking to a group of clerks up in one of the counties in mid-Michigan, and I said to them, your minutes are all too long and I haven't read any of them. Minutes are what was done, not what was said. I find your minutes very interesting. It's almost like reading a play. Everything is in there. It should be what was done, not what was said. I find minutes correct for a community, for a municipality, when the only time your name is mentioned is if you made the motion. As I mentioned, even public comment, many clerks are saying 18 people spoke. As I know, I don't know if you know, but I'm one of the trainers for the Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks, and I go do trainings at their 2-day workshops, 1 week for advanced and 1 week for starter clerks. And I do all kinds of trainings, and I get to ask. They have a wonderful setup where they can just come to the microphone and ask me things, but it allows me to turn around and ask them things. So I have asked them, what do you see changing in the way you do minutes? And one of the things they have identified is practically nothing under public comment. So if you do a comparison of the requirements of the Open Meetings Act of what should be in minutes compared to Robert's rules, almost exactly the same. They both say what was done, not what was said. So this conversation is always interesting because invariably when I talk to a municipality, somebody will say, well, we want to go back and see what we said. And then you ask them, and how recently have you checked back 10 years ago? And it's always very quiet. And they say, but we could. And I said, and how instructive would it be to know what you did or didn't do 10 years ago? And of course, the one I did very recently, which was on Zoom, they said, everything's changed. It would mean nothing what we decided to do 10 years ago. I think that's perhaps a bit extreme, but the fact is you might give some thought. However, having said that, your rules of procedure are in conflict with Roberts in the sense that they do describe putting more in the minutes, although not how much you do put in, but more in the minutes than Roberts or the OMA asks. Thank you for letting me inject that. Other questions? Yes.
Before you continue, I see a lot of some public's hand. I just want to go one round through all commissioners first, if they wish to speak, and then I'll open it to the public. And Ms. Seward, I just want to know, are you on a time? So we'll know to go quickly. Are we till 9? Because that's give us only 15 minutes.
I think that we should hear any questions that people have. I'm fine.
Right, good. Commissioner Host, go ahead, and I'll come back to you, Commissioner Hoff. Commissioner Host?
Yeah, thanks, Coco. I have a question about the First Amendment. You have given us a set of rules to...
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing him.
Should I be louder?
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask you about the First Amendment. You discourage commissioners, other than being gentlemen and ladies in their interactions. How do you reconcile one's personal First Amendment rights with Robert's rules? And that can be with regard to the public speaking to you, as well as among the podium people. Is there a difference?
I'm sorry, the difference between the public speaking to you?
Yeah, their First Amendment rights, as well as the commission and staff's First Amendment rights. Is there a difference?
I'm sorry, I'm not even understanding the question.
Let me, Commissioner Host, let me repeat your question and let me help me or correct me if I misunderstood. Ms. Seward, he's asking on the First Amendment rights, what applies to the public, should it apply to the podium? That's what he said means the commissioner body.
Why would there be a difference? What is related to this difference?
Well, what if, for example, a citizen is making a personal attack versus a commissioner making a personal attack? I'm just asking, is there a difference?
This is a very, very interesting question. And I will tell you that when I do the trainings across the state with the legal counsel for the Michigan Municipal League, frequently we are asked at what level we can consider the public being dangerous or threatening. That's a very, very common question. I notice you address it in your rules of procedure in terms of a person being threatening or rude. Unfortunately, and I'm speaking from personal experience, it is different because we have to accept the fact that we ran for election and there are going to be people who are not satisfied with what we do, who are unhappy with what we do. On the other hand, we also know that we're going to spend a significant portion of our lives with the people who are our colleagues on the city commission, and that a courtesy to one another makes it much easier to do our work. So thank you for helping me understand exactly what the question was, Mayor. So yes, it's unfortunate that the public can be rude to us in a way that courtesy would tell us not to be rude to one another. As far as the First Amendment is concerned, I can refer you to cities where the council is as rude to each other as the public is to them. So yes, under the First Amendment right, they have that right to be that way.
All right. Other commissioner comments, question? Just like I said, I want to go give the opportunity to every commissioner, should they have question. Commissioner Baller, go ahead.
Just real quick on the funnel of laws. I'm going to assume, but I'm not sure, that the first ones, that there's primacy.
Yes, you are correct. And that's why Roberts is at the bottom of the stack. So you can make any rules or put anything in your rules of procedure in conflict with Roberts. And on those things which you did not put in rules about, then you go to Roberts.
And to Commissioner Host's point, the Constitution trumps everything.
Yes, exactly.
All right, healthy dialogue. Should any Commissioner Huff, now I can come back to you, sorry.
Like to make two comments. The first is about rules of debate. Ms. Seward said the maker of the motion is entitled to speak first, and I got the sense from the way you were saying is that someone makes a motion and there's a second and then there's a discussion. That's true, but in our case, there is usually a lot of discussion prior to the motion being made. We don't begin by making the motion and then have the discussion. We begin with a discussion, then the motion is made, and then there is discussion on the motion. So I just want some clarification if we're doing it correctly or if someone's supposed to just make a motion. And
well, I mean, ideally, someone would just make a motion, but I recognize the fact, I've been there. It doesn't work that way. I think that perhaps if you get into the panel of making more motions, you're going to get there sooner. Because I think if people are going to know that we're going to make a motion, yes, there'll be usually this actually starts with a report by staff, then city commission comments, then the motion, and then the public often. But I think that if you get into the habit of making a few more motions and not ever using the word consensus or direction and actually operate as your rules say by motion, I think that you'll find that it'll get there. But however, I do always think it's a courtesy because when the person has finally made the motion, it's often as a result of the discussion and they would like to say why they chose what they did to put it in the motion.
okay, and my next comment has to do with rules during public debate where you say remarks should be limited to 2 minutes. I'd like to also throw out the suggestion that commissioner remarks be limited to 2 minutes. One of our concerns of late is that our meetings run on, and I hear a lot of repetition. And so I think if we're going to enforce a rule that public comments are limited to 2 minutes, I'd like to propose that commissioner comments at one time are limited to 2 minutes. I mean, a person can speak again, but not go on and on.
Well, I would be very interested to tell you that for many years, I gave presentations with a member of the Michigan Association of Municipal Attorneys, and we would debate this. And he would say, council members are entitled to put limits on themselves. And I would say, no, they're elected to talk. You have to let them talk as much as they like. Well, he has turned out to be correct. And there are all kinds of limitations. Some council members limit themselves to 5 minutes on a topic. That's it. You get 5 minutes, and if you don't speak your whole 5 minutes, you don't get to bank it. Others limit it to one council member gets only to comment once on each item on the agenda. Others limit it to 2 minute. In other words, there are lots of it. But I will say in every community where they're doing that, they also have a countdown timer that is visible to everyone. That's installed, of course, first for the public out of a courtesy, because it's just awful to have somebody speaking and have the bell go off and you didn't know you were at the end of your time. But it's also true for the council members where there are, yes, I can show you council rules that I have helped prepare that do limit the amount of time a council member may speak. Now, this requires, as you notice on your gold sheet, a 2/3 vote to install any limitations. And obviously, there are plenty of city councils who've decided that that 2/3 of them are willing to place a limitation on themselves in order to get Fred not to talk so much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bala, before I go second round, if you may allow me give the chance to other commissioner to speak. I see Commissioner Nikita, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions, if I could go forward.
Go ahead.
Mrs. Seward, I also want to thank you for helping us tonight. We really appreciate the insight and your long-standing understanding of not only Birmingham, but of course all of these issues and procedures. So thank you very much. I just wanted to go back to the new business question. So just to be clear, and I wanted to get a little bit of a thought on your end of how you would see this idea of adding an item, a new business, and how refined it would have to be or should be. The point I think you made was that if you wanted to bring up an issue that would potentially be a new future issue that we would review, and of course we would need to review it with proper background and all that from staff and things. So you're simply suggesting that the item would be brought up with some basic explanation and a simple discussion about whether or not it's valid enough to be put onto a future meeting. And that's really the extent of it, not an extended discussion, not a whole dialogue, not a presentation, not half an hour discussion, but simply, is this valid or not to go forward with the meeting where we can properly get the background information that we need so we can review it properly and make a call. Is that your intent with the new business?
No, I'm a step before you, Commissioner. I'm just saying that motion under new business that's unexpected simply says, I move we place this item for discussion on the next agenda. It's not asking for staff time. It's not asking for research. It's simply saying to everyone, this is what I want to talk about. And I'm going to and I want to bring it up have it discussed at the next meeting, but I don't want to surprise you about it. At the next meeting would be at the point at which the commission would discuss it and might then make a proposal for what action should take place. So I'm actually lengthening the process a step before you are.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, if I could continue, please.
Go ahead, please.
That's exactly that was the root of my question, is exactly what you just said. So initially, it's a very, very simple point. Then we put it on the agenda for discussion. And then at that time, we have a full discussion of some sort. And then we decide whether or not we move it forward in whatever capacity we need. Okay, very good. That's clear. That wasn't clear to me, and I appreciate that. I think that's really refined and a great way to do that in the most succinct way. If I could just one more question, and this is more of a maybe it's your opinion. I'm not sure if it's an official guideline, but basically, as you've been on the commission for many years and you've been a resident for many years, we all know how the commission has utilized part of the agenda for years and years and years. Of course, it always varies and it ebbs and flows. But under commissioner comments, what is your opinion or your observation or your thought, or officially what you think is the appropriate nature of what should happen under commissioner comments? And I would just leave that with the question or the clarify that from my perspective, you know, in my 11th year on the commission, that's always been a very relatively informal, simple, and basically putting together observations of something that may have happened, maybe a congratulatory point about what staff's been doing or what's happened in the city, things that have been observed. Relatively informal and not something that we have to spend more than 5 minutes on typically. I can't remember a commissioner comments period where we spent more than maybe 10 minutes on anything collectively with 2 or 3 comments from commissioners, even if we had that. So I guess the question is, how do you see the proper way that commissioner comments should be handled for a commission, not only in your experience, but I guess in general?
Well, as a matter of fact, in Roberts, it's called for the good of the order. And it's an opportunity for people to get up and speak and make an announcement of something, often congratulatory, often about themselves. And so it varies. And then from my experience for the gazillion council meetings that I've attended across the state, it really varies to the point where on Commissioner Hoff's point, it's often timed. Commissioners are given 3 minutes, 4 minutes during commissioner comments. So there has been an effort to make that not a freewheeling open discussion. And often they even have the rule that commissioner comments are not responded to by other commissioners. So they're obviously trying to limit the fact that this should not be a debate place. That should have been under new business. It's interesting. I don't know any community that doesn't have a rule against interacting with the public during public comment. That just is kind of good government. We just don't do that. That's not fair to the public or to us to ask us to respond on the moment about something. But I think that is a time, and the reason why some communities do limit the council members' time under commissioner comments is sometimes council members have taken that time to respond to things that were said earlier in the meeting under public comment. And that has become quite contentious, and that's why they're limited to just a few minutes. What's much more typical is what you describe is a 2 or 3 minute, thanks for this happening. I was pleased to see that we had a new store open. One community uses it to announce the deaths of citizens who've been active in the community. It's really all over the place, but I would say that summarized, my experience has been it's always a short opportunity for a commissioner to speak directly and then no response.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner? Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem Long.
Thank you, Mayor Boutros. Ms. Seward, in the same manner that Commissioner Nikita asked you for your opinion on commissioner comments, I'm wondering about your thoughts on the way we handle commissioner reports, which is we usually don't do them. I personally think that it might be useful that a commissioner who sits on another committee, ad hoc senior services or ad hoc on improved streets or something, routinely give a summary of the last meeting that they were at, or just say, we held a meeting, we discussed X, we're moving forward, just to keep the other commissioners informed and to inform the public that may not have seen those meetings. But I wonder what your thoughts are on the purpose and the utility of commissioner reports.
I do know some communities who have the top 3 takeaway rule, but it's written and is in the agenda. So they report on their committee. Another community that I'm actually thinking of right now also has a form that the person fills out on their committee, but it is printed in the agenda and only is mentioned if there is action required. So they would be senior services, for example, would be in the agenda and there would be a short printed report And when the opportunity came, when the mayor got to that point, the mayor would say, any comment? And almost always the person says, you have my report. So it's only when an action item would be, that it would be reported. And having said that, of course, as I began and hope you got, you can have your own procedures any way you want. And remember, the agenda, it gets switched around a lot. I think of you, Mayor Pro Tem, and your times on Parks and Recs. And I don't know if you were there through the dog park years.
Yes.
Well, then you know that we switched the agenda around to take comments from the public about the dog park in the beginning, so all those people would go home. So you can make an agenda any format you want, and it's like public comment. Public comment must be on the agenda, but you can put it on the agenda anywhere you want. You just have to have it written on every single subcommittee or committee or meeting. So if you have a sense that you'd like to work with your fellow commissioners and change the agenda around and add an item, that's perfectly common. So when you go read all the charters of your neighboring cities, also ask them for their procedural rules and see if you get any ideas from theirs. Troy is well known for a very long list of procedural rules.
Right. I would like to invite the public. Each commissioner has his fair chance now. Any other commission didn't speak at all? I believe each one of you had a question and clarification, but I will also bring it back if Ms. Seward is willing to stay on board with us for other commissioner comments. I do have a question for you, Ms. Seward, after the public, if you don't mind.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. We have Mr. Bloom. He's been, Mr. Bloom, are you there?
Hello? Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Coco, thank you very much for doing this. This is really awesome, and it's something that we've needed. I have a few questions and a comment. I guess I'll make the comment first, and that is, I'm on a board myself. I've been to many city commission meetings. I'm very well aware that Robert's rules only requires a listing of what a vote was and who voted what. Birmingham, I've been attending city commission meetings for maybe 20 years now. Birmingham has had a very rich history of documenting what's happened, and not having access to what commissioners said or what residents said, I believe would be harmful to public discourse. I go back and look at meeting minutes, as some of the commissioners can attest to. Other residents go back and look at meetings. People do run for re-election. Mr. Nikita commented that this is his 11th year serving. It's important for the public to be able to go back and have an access of the record of what happened and what commissioners did what. And I think the community benefits from us, and it's not recognized. It's not required by Robert's rules, but in my personal opinion, for what it's worth, it's something that's invaluable for promoting democracy and engaging residents so they can follow up what's going on. Okay, my questions, and I will try and be very brief. I was under the impression that if something was voted on in a city commission meeting, that it couldn't come up for another vote for a year. You had two different slides. One was that at the next meeting, it can be undone. And then the other one is that something can be revoked if something hasn't been done. So so I guess, could we get some clarity on how do you determine whether something can be undone or not, or reversed? So those are two separate questions. The third question is, when you talked about putting an item on the agenda during new business, the issue that we had in the city regarding motions during commissioner comments was direction to the city manager to do some research, bring something back, provide something to the city commission. Is that not an appropriate thing? It's not making a decision for the public, but it's asking or providing direction to the city manager to do something. Is that not inappropriate for the commissioners to be able to do, either during commissioner comments or during new business? Those are my
It is appropriate during new business, but I think we're deciding it's not appropriate during commissioner comment. And Mr. Bloom, I think you're referring to a special circumstance of something that can't come back for a year. It's not true that anything the commission voted on can't come back for a year. I think that that's an error in your research.
Okay. So for like, say, a zoning matter, there's an issue with Birmingham Place, and can something come back or be undone?
And this is a case where I would say to the citizen, I need to see your zoning ordinance. So I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. How do you determine if something if the commissioners vote to plant new trees in Shane Park, and a month later the trees haven't been planted, can the commission come back and decide when to plant those trees?
I'd have to ask if they were purchased.
If they were not purchased?
Then I would have to ask for a report from the department on why they hadn't been purchased. And if the report was not satisfactory, yes, I could undo that.
Thank you.
All right, we have Mr. Coulter.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, really enjoyed the presentation. I guess getting back to the question I had at the beginning, just trying to understand, because it seems like the rules of procedure are kind of open for the Birmingham City Commission. How is the commission agenda developed? Who has final say on the commission agenda? And how do commissioners who want a topic on the agenda get that agenda item introduced so it is on the agenda?
Well, I've answered the last part. Under new business, they make a motion to put it on the next agenda. As far as the process that has gone through with the organization of the agenda and who approves it, I think you'd need to have the manager and the clerk speak to that, with perhaps the mayor.
I mean, Joe, would you like to speak, or would you like me to answer that? You go ahead, Joe. I'll give the floor to our city manager, since he's been doing this for only 20 plus years. Go ahead, Mr. Valentine. 1 second. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The process, as you've indicated, at least during my tenure, almost 24 years now, has really been predicated on the process of how the city operates. And you have probably 26 to 28 supporting boards that serve the city commission. And a lot of the agenda items are driven by the actions of those boards, which come through staff, through myself, and are placed on the agenda. That's where a majority of those agenda items will come from. Additionally, you'll have agenda items that will come up through direction of the commission directly on things that they want to talk about, whether it be end of the meeting or beginning of the meeting or during the meeting, that they want to provide direction to the manager for things to come back and be presented. Additionally, you'll have, let's say, items that will come up through things that aren't on the agenda that perhaps are an emergency situation that arise during the course in between meetings that have to be addressed by the commission, in which case I'll have staff prepare a report and advance that with subsequent recommendations for the commission's action. So there's a host of reasons or processes by which things get placed on the agenda, but primarily really through the board process, where those boards are driving the recommendations that come before the commission on their respective areas of responsibility and advancing, whether it be in accordance with their master plans or through their just general responsibilities as a board.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Any other public comment or questions? I don't see any hand. And no, do you? No, I don't. All right, Ms. Seward, as you have the slide of yours that said, and you complimented us on, we're always starting our meeting on time. I want to be complimented that I start my meeting early and on time. Uh, um, I have a question for you on that, the rules of procedure that you mentioned in our charter, and it's a goal. You said it's a mandate in our rules of procedure that we finish our meeting at 11 p.m.?
No, I did not. I said that that there are things in the rules of procedure. Some are mandates, some are suggestions, and some are goals. And yours is simply a goal that you will finish by 11, which,
Sure.
by the way, I think the reason so many communities do have an end time in their rules is because most of the people these days in city councils have regular working days, and they're concerned that their brains don't function that well after 10:30.
Which is that my if you allow me to follow up on my question, Ms. Seward. So as a chair of a meeting, any chair of a meeting, could be me and somebody else tomorrow, can we set a time beforehand that I would say by 11 o'clock, no matter what's left on the agenda, will be postponed for the next day? And do we need a motion for that?
Yes, you do. And that's the motion on page 2. Limit or extend limits of debate. And it would be the motion, say, I move, that could be made early in the meeting. I move that we adjourn at 10 o'clock.
But as a mayor, can I make a motion?
Oh, well, that is a very interesting question. And as I travel the state, one of the things that Robert says is that all members have equal rights, but that's not true. That's true from community to community, depending upon their particular structure. Do they have a strong mayor form of government? Can the mayor veto? That's common, and I shouldn't say common, but possible in a number of communities. Does the mayor vote at all except to veto? There are communities that look like that. So the question in council manager form of government, when the citizens have elected you to be a council member and your fellow commissioners have said, well, for now you can be the mayor, you do not give up your right to make motions and second them unless your charter or your rules say so. And in your case, they do not. However, that myth that you can't persists because communities and mayors would agree, and we've talked about this in council form manager forums at the Michigan Municipal League. If I'm going to be the mayor, I have to be seen as chairing the meeting. That's my role. I'm the facilitator. If there are 6 other members and nobody else will make that motion or second it, it's not going anywhere anyway. So generally speaking, in council manager form of government, mayors, when they're during their time as 1 year or 2 years, when the commission selects them, they tend not to make motions nor second them.
So
but you are entitled to.
Would it be more appropriate to ask, can I have a motion as it's 11
Yes.
o'clock from a commissioner? That would be the
Yes.
most appropriate way to handle this. And if the motion, whatever left on the agenda, would I adjourn after the motion passed?
You would take the motion early in the meeting, and when 11 o'clock came, at 10:55, you would say, 5 minutes to go,
Huh.
and I'm going to adjourn the meeting if there's not a motion to extend, because there's always the option. One of the things about Roberts is hardly anything is ever dead end. Almost everything has what we call a loop back in mediation. It's almost always a loop back. So if you were in the middle of something really hot at 10:55, someone of the commissioners could move to extend the time, but it would require 2/3.
Thank you for the clarification, Ms. Stewart. I want to take the opportunity again and really thank you for refreshing our minds. I've been a city commissioner for 5 years, and on a daily basis, you learn something new. And sometimes you get shocked by something that you never witnessed before. It's not the time you've been just serving. We're evolving and things change. And like you said, there's a book coming out right now that don't waste your time on it. Wait till September. But thank you for refreshing our mind. especially we have some also new commissioners, which is great. I consider myself still new. I think this job needs at least 10 years plus to be an expert on it. But I can't thank you enough for all.
Well, I
all the,
thank everyone for participating and for all the really good questions. Thank you.
appreciate you.
Thank you, Coco.
Thank you.
With that, I think that would conclude our presentation and wonderful first workshop we've done this year. Ms. Seward, thank you, but I see a hand raised before I adjourn the meeting. Commissioner Baller, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's more to talk about, and maybe it's not tonight, but I mean, the essence of a workshop is I think for me is we learn, we hear this kind of presentation, we ask questions, and we try to get somewhere. I think that this has been an excellent sort of lesson in democracy. I doubt that Robert's rules and rules of procedure are employed in autocratic regimes. And so, this is really good. We need to understand these procedures. And I think in some minor, some not so minor respects, we've gotten away from it. And we've talked about a few of those things tonight. And that I think that if we do follow the recommendations, we can begin to get back into best practices. But and I'm concerned that if we adjourn right now, and we have this rule that I don't understand why we can't take action. We notice these meetings, we put out an agenda, and I don't understand the rationale behind routinely placing on the agenda a statement for workshops that we will take no action, because I'm fear that if we take no action at this workshop, we may not take any action. We had a workshop in January where we seemed to agree that we ought to have workshops. And this is our first workshop almost 8 months later. And so, I guess we've already told the public that we're not going to take any action tonight, but I wonder what the plan is. Are we going to come back at a meeting, and why? It's only 9:15. Why can't we, use the rest of 2 to 2.5 hours and actually resolve in some way, whether formally or not, to do something?
For the sake of the respect of the time promised by Ms. Seward, I think this is a discussion we can have among us. I don't believe Mrs. Seward can make decisions for us or discuss those items. That's up to us. I don't want to speak for you, Ms. Seward, but I hope I'm answering in the right direction. I think you gave us most basic, important parliamentary procedures and rules that we have to, again, refresh our mind and follow and maybe change in the future. But I think internal discussion, as Commissioner Baller, I do agree 100% that workshop should be to discuss further item, to have more communication among us. But I just don't want Ms. Seward time to be on while we're doing that. So
I wish you well, and I don't hesitate to come back with follow-up questions if one of the things you decide to do is to rewrite your rules of procedure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Have a wonderful night.
Okay.
So, Commissioner Baller, we can have a few minute wrap up among us, as I don't want to adjourn the meeting directly. Commissioner Hoff's hand, I see it. Go ahead.
Mayor, you made an announcement in the beginning and you've repeated it during this session, and it's something that's longstanding, that no formal actions will be taken.
No, we're not. Yeah, we're not changing that decision, Commissioner Hoff, by any means. This is a suggestion by Commissioner Baller in the future workshop, if to consider why not take actions. And he made it clear that we already decided tonight there's no action. We're not we're not making any action tonight. We're not taking any actions, and we're not changing directions how we started the meeting. He just suggested that maybe for future workshop, we need some time to further discuss items if we need to.
I might also add, Mayor.
One second, Commissioner Baller. Commissioner Sherman, go ahead.
Ordinarily, if when we finish a workshop, if there are issues that need to come back to the commission, they come back as part of our general agenda at a future meeting. So that would be how anything would go on. There's no point in continuing this discussion any further. The whole idea was for Ms. Seward to provide us with information. She's done that. We've asked questions of her. The purpose of our workshop is concluded. If Commissioner Beller wants to continue this discussion, he can continue it with himself at home.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to move to adjourn. It's enough. We go through this every single meeting, and we shouldn't be doing this anymore. So I'm going to move to adjourn.
Yeah, we started with a wonderful.
Mr. Mayor, I actually put a motion to adjourn here.
And I will, Commissioner Sherman, I just want to politely adjourn the meeting as professionally as I always conducted my business. I want to say thank you for every commissioner's time, our city staff for putting this together. And I hope to continue to do some workshop in the future. And I hope we can finish the workshop as exactly how we started the workshop, with a smile and positive energy. And I would keep my energy positive as I am happy doing what I'm doing. And with that, I'd like to say good evening. I'd like to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
Meeting adjourned. Have a good evening.